Adrian, I think you should be good to start.
Okay, perfect. Well, like Yaz said, thank you so much for everyone making themselves available and coming along to the webinar today, especially to yourself, Shelley. We're really grateful that you were able to participate. And I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to this session. The aim of today is to talk about all things Entra ID governance. We will also kind of cover where this sits in and amongst your identity journey generally. And like I say, I'm thrilled that we've got Shelley here who can kind of give us a bit of an overview of some of the actionable steps that we can take, how Microsoft can support, and a whole load of different things. So hopefully lots of interesting content and good ground to cover today. Just as an introduction to myself, I'm Gillian Jones. I'm a Senior Business Development Manager at Condatis. I am in a really fortunate position that I get to work across multiple different accounts, multiple different partners, multiple different sectors, and work very closely with the Microsoft Entra platform to make sure that identity not only is getting the priority that it needs in and amongst the IT priorities of our clients, but also understanding what comes next and what does a good solution look like to solve multiple business challenges for our customer base. So lots of excitement and lots of good things coming down the pipeline for us and our partnership with Microsoft. Shelley, over to you to say hi.
Thanks, Gillian. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Hill, and I'm an identity specialist at Microsoft, and I'm focused on the capabilities that we have within Entra, which is the family of products that support identity and access management.
Perfect. Okay, let's click onto the next slide. Okay, so I think the agenda for today, we kind of decided it was one of those ones that we were having a conversation, weren't we, Shelley? And we were talking about ID governance specifically, but then realized actually, do you know what, this is maybe quite a good opportunity to just take a pause and say, right, what are the most common challenges that we're seeing in identity today? Why and how does ID governance solve those challenges? We'll talk about it a little bit more later in the presentation, but I certainly was of the opinion that ID governance was, a very big solution for a very big problem. But actually what we can do is talk about, depending where you are on your identity journey, where ID governance fits in and why it is so applicable and so relevant for kind of every stage. We'll talk about some of the use cases that we've seen, lessons learned where ID governance maybe wasn't used, and then we actually are now thinking, God, that would have been a great solution. And then, as I say, we're going to talk about what comes next. There is the opportunity to come off mute and ask questions, but maybe we can do that at the end if that's okay, or put it into the chat and we can kind of curate them and go through them at the end if that is okay with everyone. All right, so let's get into the details here. So one of the most common challenges that I think we've been hearing recently, and I know that you're very, very familiar with, Shelley, is all around MIM sunsetting. So for those that don't know, I think it would be really good to kind of give an overview of what MIM is. No, that's not right. MIM is and why it's been so widely implemented. And then what does ID governance really do to kind of fill some of the gaps that might be left by MIM?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Gillian. So MIM, or Microsoft Identity Manager, it's an on-prem orchestration tool, essentially. It's been around for many, many years. And what it does is it enables organizations to automate join and move a lever processes and provision users to applications. It has there's been so many iterations of this tool before it even became MIM. And now identity governance, it's just the next iteration of this tool. So if you have Microsoft Identity Manager now, or MIM now, mainstream support will be available until January 2029. So it's still a bit of time yet, although MIM itself is no longer actively being developed. Instead, development is now focused on the cloud capabilities to manage the identity lifecycle of both employees and external identities. And also the management of access lifecycle of those users too. So it's not just for cloud resources, but also for on-prem resources. And with this investment in identity governance over the last year, we're seeing that gap between on-prem and cloud world converge. So it really doesn't matter where your resources live, but you can have that central management. But I think that's the key thing here to understand, is that the MIM itself is just an iteration of Microsoft's identity management capabilities through the years. And that investment now is just really targeted in identity governance itself.
Okay, that's really, really good to know. So I suppose the headlines are MIM will still be around for a reasonably long period of time, but obviously the spend and the support will be kind of transitioning to elsewhere. So
yeah,
okay, not an immediate need to necessarily do that migration, but obviously the sooner the better, and you can also get the benefit of the many Microsoft dollars that will be put towards that. So that's always exciting. That teases up nicely for the next challenge that we're speaking about a lot. So again, I'm more than happy to state my naivety before I really got into the world of identity to understand the complexity around joiner, mover, leaver, managing identities, siloed systems, point solutions, all of that good stuff. Understanding why it's so difficult when people get, merge roles, they get new jobs, new titles, new access, new entitlements. I think it's really interesting. As I say, we hear a lot of people just saying that essentially it's kind of got out of control. And we also, looking at that from an identity point of view and from a security point of view, can see where the risks really lie with that. So I think it's one of those ones that we've known for a long time that this is an issue, but actually now that I understand the complexity, and then we've kind of obviously done a bit of a matching process as to where identity governance can solve for a lot of those challenges, I feel like we're actually in good shape to be able to really solve for a lot of those challenges. Obviously, Shelley, you speak to a number of clients as well. Would you say that this is one of the big priorities going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And that probably brings us on to the next slide, really, in terms of, identifying the responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will definitely, we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail for sure. This was one that, as I say, through our conversation, it's been really interesting that this is now something that's being talked about a lot. So the emergence of physical and digital identity access. So I think that digital identity access obviously has been very, very clearly earmarked as an identity problem, but now we're seeing that physical access. Did I say digital or physical? Either way, digital access always been kind of within the realms of identity. I think physical access and accessing different parts of buildings or parts of the organization or whatever it might be, it's really interesting to me to see how this is now coming together. And when we were talking about this, right, we were just saying about how there are so many different kind of moving parts and how many bits and pieces that are now kind of coming underneath that identity umbrella. Are you also finding that kind of becoming a more of a prevalent conversation, Shelley, or where does this sit with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that link between physical and digital is just is growing because it makes sense that
It does, yeah.
it makes sense. If you don't want somebody to have access to a physical location, you probably don't want them to have access to to digital locations either. I think I mean, if you think about it, digital locations, they're actually it's data on a server somewhere, isn't it? So it's the same. It's an access problem that we're trying to solve. Yeah,
exactly right. Okay, so kind of tee us up for the next slide. I think what we're going to dive into now, and I think actually kind of is a really good overarching theme for a lot of the conversations today, is one of the big challenges, where does the responsibility lie? So we've just mentioned a few examples there around MIM that probably traditionally sat within IT. You've got JML, which is very much an HR type solution or complex thinking. You've got physical access. I don't even know where that would necessarily sit. That, for example, in a university could sit with the specific teams, the specific faculties. So I think what we're really going to look at now is one of the big questions to answer for, and I think that identity governance helps us solve, is where does the responsibility lie? How are you going to streamline that within an organization? And who's going to be responsible going forward for maintaining these sorts of solutions? So I'll flick onto the next slide and maybe we can dive into this. So we're both involved in a number of different identity projects, but I appreciate that this has kind of, been a real sharp focus for yourself in the last wee while, Shelley. So I guess, what do you see being the main challenge around this? And what do people find difficult about finding that ownership of the identity solution?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of the biggest challenges we see is defining that framework of responsibility within an organization. It's not going to be exactly the same in every organization, but there are certain things that in terms of certain responsibilities in terms of identity and access that can common across many different companies. What it comes down to is that it's not a simple answer, but generally what happens is IT are the orchestrators. They make access happen. But if ultimately, if you want to automate your joiner mover leaver processes, then it's your source of truth that is really responsible for who should be getting access. So usually that's HR. HR are the ones that determine if someone should have an identity. So that makes them responsible for that initial authorization. So yes, this person should have access because they have an identity and they're employed here. And our source of truth, which may or may not be HR, sometimes we've seen sort of deviations among organizations, but certainly they have to be responsible for that initial step. But then who owns the resources? Who owns the applications and the data? And that's usually, it's not one team, and it's not usually IT either. If you're thinking about IT security, IT infrastructure, they shouldn't be the ones that have to make authorization decisions on resources that they don't own. So the resource owners and the data owners, they need to have that authority delegated to them. And then, so it's really, I suppose, a team effort. But the main challenge I see is that there needs to be this culture shift in an organization away from identity being that IT problem. IT is very much the enabler, but not the authorization giver. So in every organization, I see that there needs to be that understanding of where the lines or the boundaries of responsibilities lie. And then to add on that, another challenge I would say is that this really aligns with culture and buy-in, not just of the people that are responsible for those boundaries of the joiner mover leaver processes and the access management. It's the buy-in of everyone and the acceptance of that there's going to be process change within the organization when we go through this process. And that really comes down to education internally, of course, on why managing risk and compliance for identity and access management it's everyone's responsibility at some point. And yes, it's a pain. And yes, we're going to ask you do an access review every quarter or every 8 weeks. But we're going to make it as easy as possible. So please take it seriously, because the consequences of just they completely undermine your organization's investment in protecting your data and making the company compliant.
Well, I think it's interesting that, as you say, it's that buy-in and kind of understanding that everyone has a responsibility. I think, unfortunately, headlines on the one hand do nothing to help our confidence in that, but I think they also highlight, like, when you're looking at, a variety of different stories or a variety of different, kind of posts around different organizations that have been hacked, or the way that cyber attacks are now potentially happening. It's so interesting to see that actually identity and some of the things that we're going to talk about actually kind of are the route in for a lot of cyber attacks, unfortunately. But that's good, right? Because if I put myself in the shoes of somebody that's, say, sitting on a help desk, or that is part of thinks that, oh, this isn't really my responsibility, or even if I'm an HR manager and I'm thinking I'm trying to make my people happy, I'm trying to do certain things in my function, this identity side of things is not up to me. Well, if I then start thinking about, well, if I don't do it and then I find that there's a hole in my bucket, that's a problem, right? And that problem will then lie on me. So I guess it's one of those things that, yes, there is a culture shift that's required. There is probably a little bit of fear around this just now, and I can understand why. But I also think it's really important to say, like, the tools are there. The expertise are there. That's why you work with Microsoft. That's why you work with Condatis, because we can kind of come along and say, okay, this is how we go about fixing things. This is what we do to take you through the process. Things are going to be okay, and there are incremental gains that we can make. So I think that, hopefully, throughout the course of this discussion today, I think, both you and I are very passionate about, okay, don't boil the ocean, don't freak out. These are the kind of steps that we can take. And again, depending on where you are on the identity journey, there are different ways that we can go about it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think, like we were talking about, so before kind of understanding a little bit more about identity governance, this for me very much felt like, feels like, identity governance feels like a big thing. do I need to do this once my identity solutions are very, very established? You know, is this something that needs to come in once the horse is bolted almost? Like where, you know, what happens and what are the things that it can do? And I think that one of the things that's really interesting, and you know, through my reading kind of and working with our client base, is there are loads of things that can be put in through the identity governance platform with Microsoft that actually can kind of limit any problems before they even emerge. You can really be proactive of like, okay, what does good look like? What are the manual processes that I don't want to do? Or what are the manual processes that I am doing that I no longer want to do? Again, I think there's an awful lot that we can explore in this. We speak to a lot of people about kind of, you know, building in-house scripts for automation, you know, doing the JML related processes and maybe doing them in, you know, a slightly cumbersome way, which I think we could all put our hands up and saying we've all been in organizations where that's been the case. There's so many different things that I think it can solve for. We've got a few of them up on the screen, but if you don't mind, I was kind of going to throw this over to you now, Shelley, to kind of walk us through a user journey, if that's okay, and then we can kind of talk to that if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so yeah, we've got our user journey here, and ultimately we want to start with onboarding a user, so we can automate the creation of a user so that they have an account on day one. I mean, that's the ideal scenario, when somebody turns up on their first day, that they actually have an account with access that they need. We can make sure they have that account. There's provision on the day of their start date with the temporary access password and some birthright access. And we can provide the ability for users to request additional access as needed as well, because, you know, as Gillian said, we don't want to boil the ocean necessarily, and we want to be able to make sure we can get value from these workflows as quickly as possible. But ultimately, every user needs an account when they start on that first day with some basic access and a password. So we can sort that out. And you mentioned on the last slide, actually, integrating. There was a little bit on that piece of the puzzle that said integrating with non-Microsoft services and vendors. Now, we have connections for over 3,500 non-Microsoft applications. So whether you're trying to provision users, you're providing SSO, even something else, but anything that's non-standard, this is certainly where an area where partners like Condatis can help, because they've usually done it before. But in the main, you'll find that integrating applications and automating their access will have relevant support documentation. And on top of this, you know, if you're using MIM, then many of your MIM connectors will actually be reusable and are compatible with Entra.
Okay, that's cool.
So you've got, you know, your users all set up and they've got the access they need, or they've requested the access, the additional access that they've needed. But as users change roles, their access requirements change too. So, you know, we need to be able to review that access. And this could be access to resources or applications, or even access to privileged roles. Now, this process is around movers. It's really part of the access lifecycle management. In Entra ID, we call this entitlement management, and you can use it to ensure that there are multiple levels of approvals. You can do separation of duties checks. And we can also use it to ensure that access is frequently reviewed by an appropriate person or group. You know, maybe it's the manager, maybe the resource owner, or even sometimes maybe self-attestation is appropriate. Now, the access lifecycle here is closely entwined with mover processes, but there might also be other supplementary workflows that we want to kick off, like an email to the user's new manager, or perhaps there's new equipment is required, and so we need to raise a ticket for that, and that can all be automated as well. Now, the triggers for these workflows that signify a mover or a change, that's an event, is in the access lifecycle. That could be a change in job title or status. Maybe somebody's on long-term leave, or some other criteria that we're receiving from our source of truth. So you know somebody's changed in HR, again, back to that source of truth at HR. Somebody's changed that criteria, something about that user, and that can be a trigger to ensure that user, the mover process or leaver process, or whatever that might be, can trigger the appropriate workflows. Of course, when a user leaves, we want to make sure that all that access is revoked, that they're deprovisioned properly. We want to make sure that devices are returned, mailboxes are archived. And again, we have maybe other supplemental workflows that are triggered as part of decommissioning of a user. And it's very much a staged offboarding, just like we have staged onboarding. Now, this is all part of the user lifecycle and the capabilities that we have in Entra today. And there are auditable logs for all of these changes. So some very good provisioning logs which actually show, what was the trigger, what was the change that triggered the workflow, what was the criteria, what was the decision, and the result, and what were the updated attributes, and the outcome of this trigger that came from HR. So it's all available there in Entra today.
Okay, that's awesome. We were laughing, weren't we? Because I had a bit of this is going to sound really silly, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call that are going to say, "Good, do you actually work in identity?" But identity and access management, identity and access are actually very different things.
Yeah.
And they are very different. They're managed in very different ways. And they are obviously very, very closely linked, hence why you have IAM practices and all that good stuff. But actually the work to manage those individual components and actually have a really joined up solution, they are very different. As I say, when I was looking at kind of learning more about ID governance, I hadn't really thought about all the access and entitlement and all that type of thing really in that sort of level of detail. But I can now understand why that whole JML process is so complex. And I kind of understand the joiner part and the leaver part, and you can see, right, okay, those are almost ring fenceable, if that makes sense. But that whole mover, and how do you navigate through that, and what comes with that, and why we see things like permission creep, why we see, people having access to things that they shouldn't have. I can completely see, why that happens very easily, because it's a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think that the mover process, it is a mover process, and because there 100% there will be other things that happen as part of that, as I said, with, a change in managers maybe. But that really, ultimately, why are we concerned about the mover process? Because of permissions creep. Ultimately, we don't want people to be, accumulating access to resources. Ultimately, that's why it's a concern, and why the mover process needs to be considered as part of the whole JML process.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. Okay, I kind of want to switch tack a little bit just now, and as we mentioned at the top of the discussion, I think one of the things we're looking at now is, we've talked a lot about there in the user journey, and I think a lot of that information that you've just shared there was, really, really fantastic and super pertinent for I'm sure a lot of people listening. But I think what we then want to do is kind of map that to the stage of your identity journey. Now, I talk about this all the time because I think identity is a journey, and it's one that's changing, and we have new and emerging technologies that are coming into the Entra product suite. To be honest, Entra itself has changed, right? It was lots of different component parts, and now it's all under one umbrella. So Microsoft are on their own identity journey in terms of what they're doing and how they're consolidating a lot of their offerings. We're on our journey as to how do we service our clients around that, and what comes next, and what's the best tool within the toolkit to use. But then, as an organization, where are you on that road? What are the things that you can do along the way that are going to make things, it's kind of, we're both mothers, so it's like age and stage, right? It's a bit like that, isn't it? I can't think of a better analogy, but it is. It's, where are you on the journey? Where are you, and what stage are you at? And what are the things that you could be doing along that journey? So if we have a look at an early stage identity journey. So this is kind of obviously, perhaps you have a number of employees, you are doing certain things, but you're thinking, okay, this could be better, but is it a little bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut? Are we, going to put in a governance layer that is maybe unnecessary? Or I think probably the way that we see it, and certainly at Condatis, what we've done is we're a 50-person organization, and we're growing. We do a lot of good stuff. We also sometimes have contractors. There is a bit of complexity in there. So what we want to do is set ourselves up for success. What are the automation processes that we can put in place? What are the rules? What are the things that we want to do to make sure that as we scale, as we grow, as we onboard people, as we do all the different things that we're doing, we're working from a solid base? So I guess, Shelley, from your side, what do you think the things that ID governance offers that kind of, really set you off on the right path? Or are there any kind of top tips you would share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the first thing that I would do if you want to automate JML, because usually there's all these other big strategic plans going on. First thing I would do is document every step of your joiner process and your leaver process, but document every step. Exactly. How did they get into HR? Who creates the account and when? How long before someone starts? It's no good saying we want to create someone's account or provision them a device 2 weeks before they start when actually they don't get added into HR until a week before. So it's those kind of things. Exactly what, who creates the account? How is a device requested? When you look at all of those processes, you'll find that there's a lot of manual steps probably, and of course, organizations are usually on this journey of modernization, which can take years, and they're taking bits out and putting stuff in. But if we can just look at the manual processes, this is where you can realize benefits early on. Look at automating the manual processes. Don't boil the ocean in personas. Just start by automating basic creation of the user account with basic access, a temporary access password to ensure they can get started on their first day. If a user admin has a checklist, and I've seen that in many organizations, there'll be some admin person who has a checklist to say, these are the things you've got to do when a new joiner starts. That's a great place to start automation. If someone's manually creating tickets to request extra access for a user or to request a device, then you can automate that creation. You can automate the access and just remove those manual steps. And it just provides a much more consistent and an efficient experience. And then you can do the same in reverse for levers.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key easy wins.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. Like, everybody's doing this, right? It's not as if we're asking people or suggesting people do something completely foreign. A lot of people are doing these processes just now. So I love that idea of taking the checklist, which, I do love a tick list myself.
Yeah,
so automation of that, how sad, but you know what I mean? I can totally see where that would be consistent. And like you say, it's got that record of, time stamping and all of that stuff. So from the auditability, I think that's really good, really a really great bit of advice. If we then move it on to the intermediate stage, and I just want to just back up just a little bit. This is not necessarily a linear process. You can, you're not either early stage, intermediate, or disruptive. You're going to have flavors of in all of this. But I guess it was just a way that we were looking to kind of bucket some of the key themes that we see around this. And I think that this is where, certainly from my conversations, this is where you'd maybe say you have lots of different applications, you have lots of different identity providers in play, you have quite siloed systems, or people have put in tactical solutions because they've had a problem there and then around like a JML process or something like that, and they've kind of fixed that. And I think what we would then see is, right, we have all these different players that are in the ecosystem. How do you consolidate? How do you kind of try and pull it back together to give one consistent experience? And I guess, like, consolidation, making it a little bit more robust, but again, not having any technologies or processes that are real outliers that actually can't be replicated or shouldn't be replicated across a business. Would you agree that that's kind of where we find a lot of people that we're talking to at the minute? And I guess, the $1 million question, what do you think are the golden ticket items within the ID governance platform that really help this type of complexity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I feel like, as you say, some of these projects around consolidation and around some tactical solutions can really actually be a bit of a blocker, and it's almost like it's a mental blocker. It's like, oh, we can't do anything until we've fixed this issue. So I would say take a really good look at the tactical solutions you have, and just be careful about overcomplicating processes to work around tactical decisions that are made in the past. You don't want to build an extra technical debt. Can't say the word. You don't want to build that in, of course. But so again, I would be, try and separate it out. What are the, document those existing processes in the environment, consider if it's worth investing in a workaround, that if it's only going to have a limited shelf life. So yeah, take those into consideration. In terms of those golden ticket items that make the most impact, so two things here I would say. Firstly, automate the manual bits where it makes sense. Not only will that obviously help with providing just a consistent experience for end users, but it adds a layer of observability, and it also ensures that just things don't get forgotten about. The other golden ticket thing I would say is just look at access recertification. Assign access reviews to managers, to resource owners. Look at your inactive users. You can do inactive user reviews in Entra. So it's quick to set up, and it's a way of reducing risk without actually having done any automation yet. So I'd say that's sort of, a way of helping getting back control, certainly.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that you raised there is, basically looking at those tactical solutions that have been in place, feeling like, well, we did that for a specific reason, and now we're quite wedded to that. I make no shame about my complete bias here, but that's kind of why I would suggest working with Condatis or companies like Condatis. We don't have any of those. We don't have that baggage, right? We don't know this time and place and what was going on for a tactical solution, for example, to be put in place. We can kind of, I suppose, look at this quite holistically. Look at the licenses, for example, from Microsoft that are already in play. Look at the different solutions or the different problems that you're trying to solve for. And I think one of my favorite things now that we have all of these different Entra tools at our disposal is saying, "Ooh, ID governance would work over here for this, but actually you could do this, and we can maybe look at verified ID over here," and you can start building up, a really, really robust and very business specific solution, but again leveraging that kind of overall platform from Microsoft. So I think that that's one of the things that we're finding ourselves involved in, a lot more of those conversations, to just be like, okay, let us take the step back, let us look at everything with a kind of that objective view and say, right, these are the things that we can do, and here's actually your path to success. And whether that just be a roadmap that people can implement themselves, or we can be there to actually do the work, completely depends. But I do think it kind of offers that yeah, we don't have the opposite of rose tinted specs, right? We can see things for what they are. So I think that can be helpful. Okay, so the next one is talking about kind of disruptive IAM stages. And I think this is interesting because I appreciate that, the topic of this conversation is very much around ID governance and a lot of that. But I do think that, as I kind of just touched upon, the emergence and the convergence of a lot of different identity solutions under Entra, I think actually gives us a really interesting opportunity to look at different problems, look at different business challenges, and then, as I say, have that kind of toolbox that we can say, right, actually, you could look at something like decentralized identity and verified ID for certain pieces of the puzzle, whilst that links back to your governance strategy, whilst that links back to Entra ID. This is what we can do for external. You then kind of, you can really have like a really nice pick list of what are the challenges I have and how am I going to solve for it using the Entra platform. I think that, the things that we're seeing is the efficiency gains and the things that you can do for, say, automation and all that good stuff that we've talked about a lot around identity governance. Potentially, another way of looking at it is you could do a lot of those processes. You can, obviously, make your JML processes better than they are today. And one of the things that kind of can get spat out at the end is potentially using like an employee ID or a verified ID. And then you can start seeing kind of what the future looks like, because we know that this is coming. And I think that employees and certainly that kind of closed ecosystem, it's a really interesting place to start. So for me, things like physical and digital access, this is where this has become super prevalent. So you could then start using, similar credentials to access buildings as you can to access IT systems, as you can to access documents. I know that actually we've got a kind of resources section towards the end of the presentation, which obviously we can share with people. But one of the things we were talking about is actually using, a Microsoft ID, an Entra ID, to then be able to go on and access, different when you're onboarding, you can go and, purchase your equipment, and you can be accessing a discount and all these different things. So I think it's quite interesting that now we're seeing Microsoft leading the way in terms of that thinking. We're obviously able to follow and implement these really, really good solutions for our customers. And, you know, what do you think about that, Shelley? Like, in terms of your excitement levels, obviously I appreciate you've been with Microsoft for a long time and you've seen kind of the way that things are working. It's quite a different way to view things, I think, and it's really exciting.
It is. I think in terms of, as you said, verified ID, I think it really supports identity and access management processes for physical and digital. It's particularly verified ID with like face check and being able to incorporate that, so we really know it's, you know, who a person is. We can have that verified ID, that we can have that initial check, so somebody uploads their, you know, their government ID, and that gets, you know, all confirmed, and somebody, you know, we actually have that that automation capability now, just to speed that process along, especially if there's, you know, when you have a workforce where you don't necessarily see people in person. So to be able to confirm that when somebody you're employing is who you think they are, and then to take that a step further, you know, contacting help desk, being able to use that verified ID to, you know, confirm actually, yeah, this is the person I'm speaking to, instead of having to ask them some secret questions or, you know, personally identifiable information. That verified ID can, you know, being able to do that actually allows the help desk to have that confidence level that they are resetting the password for, you know, who they think they are.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that, didn't we, with the MGM hack again, which has, you know, been all over the press. But that's exactly what happened, right? Somebody phoned up the help desk. They, you know, said, "Can I get my username and password?" Yeah, no problem. And pretended to be an employee and took down the entire organization. They lost millions and millions of dollars. Like, and I would, you know, that's not necessarily the most sophisticated of cyber attacks. We know that there are other ones that are, you know, crazy complex, but it just shows you actually people are like, they're you know, there's some pretty bad actors out there, right? They're going to do some things that are not okay. So how can we, you know, put in the tools and make sure that we are protecting ourselves? I think it can never be more pertinent than now.
Exactly, and that actually that's in the at the back there. One of the resources we're providing actually is a link through, so you can actually check out how that might look, how it would, yeah, an example of how it could look in your environment, being able to do that help desk, you know, verified ID check.
Oh, perfect, cool, yep, great. And as I say, we can make that obviously available to participants, no problem. Okay, so what I thought we could do now is have a look at some of the use cases. So there are a variety of different ones here, and again, we could talk about all of them in great detail, but we do not have the time today. So what we can do is just, as I say, have a little bit of an overview of some of these. We didn't specifically use identity governance, but you can see why identity governance would be really applicable for these use cases going forward, and the things that are really important and we want to make sure that we're kind of, you know, solving for. So the first one to talk to is Sellafield. So we were fortunate enough to work with Sellafield to implement a staff passport. And essentially, the really key thing there was it was based on decentralized identity. So we were looking at verifiable credentials. But the ultimate problem that they were trying to solve for, and I think that this would resonate with so many different people, is identifying who their employees were. So I am who I say I am, and I can access the different documents or the different resources or the different areas of the building that I need to. And I have the qualifications and current certifications that I need to perform my job. So again, as I've learned more about identity governance, I start unpacking that and thinking, actually, each component part of that in itself is quite challenging. Like, how do you know that people's certifications are up to date? How do you know that they can do the job that they're there to do? You know, all of those different things. And I think that, you know, having those automated processes, having the ability to flag anything that, you know, might be a little bit inconsistent or could present a risk, and that auditability, I think it's huge going forward. And again, when you have particularly things such as Sellafield or other, you know, large complex nuclear or, you know, whatever industrial type sites you have, you know, being able to bind your identity to different access rights and different kind of use cases, it's so important. And you know, I think that we've got some great lessons learned, and hopefully, you know, it's a good example for people on the call. The other one that is quite interesting is something that Condatis ourselves, we've implemented this. So we are now using verified ID, but also using kind of identity governance and a lot of rules and kind of underlying process to do a check-in, check-out solution for our office. So when we come in, we use our identities. We basically check into the office. A lot of it at the minute we're using for kind of health and safety, and we're keeping the use cases quite small. But obviously, it's really good. A lot of us work from home, obviously post-COVID, a lot of people do. So it's then being able to say, okay, well, when are the kind of peak usage? When are people in the office? Who's in the office if there is a fire alarm? I never know when the tests are versus when the real fire alarm goes off. So there's a whole load of use cases that we're putting in there. And again, we're learning a lot by essentially practicing on our own staff, which is pretty cool. I think the one that, that we both kind of get really excited about, Shelley, is the NHS. And I think it's been really interesting because essentially the reason that we are so excited about it and the opportunity going forward is because we didn't think about a real component part. So the NHS Staff Passport was designed to help staff move around during COVID. So, obviously individual NHS trusts, they're essentially completely separate entities. So actually that whole mover process within the NHS is actually a full GML process every time because they are completely different entities, completely different IT infrastructure, and all of that good stuff that we're pretty familiar with. What I think is really interesting is that initially there was a great job done in terms of being able to move doctors and nurses and clinicians to be available at where they were most needed. But we didn't think about the digital side. So we could move the people, we could get them into hospitals, we could kind of, improve all of that side. So, reduce a 4-week onboarding process to literally 4 minutes. That's awesome. But we couldn't get them onto the systems to create prescriptions. We couldn't get them onto the systems to be able to access the documentation that we needed. So again, it's thinking about, identity and access and where they come together. I think it's been a really good example of, okay, what does it look like? And I guess, obviously a lot of these use cases we're talking about, do you have, what do you think, Shelley? Like, what do you want to add to those? Because I think they are interesting.
Yeah, no, I think they are. They're really interesting, and you're right. Particularly when you did the NHS project, that was actually before we had an integration with identity governance, with entitlement management. And I think, as you said, you sort of lessons learned and all that. Like you were able to move the users around, but that wasn't tied up with their sort of their digital, their access. So I think, of course, I suppose lesson learned is keeping in mind what the end goal is. But I think also now that we actually have that integration with entitlement management, so that to be able to help the verified ID can almost be a trigger, I guess, in terms of or sort of incorporated as part of those access requests and access packages. I think that that is probably something I think you probably would have thought about if it was available at the time. But I think that the lesson really is just, that users need access to do their job. So it's great to verify someone, but you need to tie it up with that and efficient access to resources. Otherwise, you're not really seeing the full benefit, and you're still, great. They're there on the day, but they still don't actually have the access they need. So it's really important to tie it together as much as possible.
And I think that this, fair enough, I'm happy to be called a bit of a nerd or whatever, but I think this is my favorite part of my job is, I've heard this problem over here, but that sounds a bit like what you've got over there. And this is how we can kind of go around solving for it. And actually the fact that I am, lucky enough, and I know that you're the same, Shelley, we're not industry specific, we're not vertical specific. We speak to so many different clients across multiple different sectors, and it's really interesting to then say, oh, we did a bit of that over with the NHS, but this is how it could work for you. And actually, you really kind of piece the puzzle together to make sure that we're providing the best solutions that we can for our clients, and it's hugely rewarding on that basis. Okay, so let's do some practical guides here, because again, we can talk about all of this in theoretical and lessons learned and all that good stuff, but let's kind of get down to a little bit of the brass tacks of, okay, what are we going to have to do? And I think that there is a bit of an elephant in the room, and I know we have alluded to it, but there is a painful part of this, right? At the beginning of the process, we are going to have to do some work, and we are going to have to look hard in the mirror to turn around and say, this is not really working for us. How do we make it better? So perhaps, we can go through some of the steps that we can take, and what's your experience, Shelley? Because again, you're at the forefront of helping people with this.
Yeah, I'd say, well, once you've identified those manual processes, and great, what can you actually automate there? But I think really what is the most painful part, and the bit that kind of is one of the key steps, in all the first step really, it's all about, and the data that you have today. So it's usually a bit of an HR data cleanse, because you need to align what you have in HR with what is in AD. You'll find that you'll have accounts that are orphans. They don't align. You have active accounts that don't align with any of your identities in the HR, or the the source of truth, I should call it. So they're orphaned accounts. There'll be mismatched employee IDs. There'll be duplicate accounts. We've seen it all. But I think that's probably the most painful part, is actually saying, well, this is our source of truth. This is what we have today, and you need to be able to align that data. So you need to link those identities with their accounts, and I'd say that's probably the hardest bit, because I don't think there's it's not really a template for it, because everybody's situation is going to be slightly different. But I mean, it's this is why I think engaging with niche specialist partners like Condatis, because you're subject matter experts, you've done this before, and I think this is where partners really help, because the gotchas, you've been through the deployment, you understand the challenges that there are in what you can do to avoid the problems. You've seen it before. You've seen it how things can be done efficiently, and also you can look at those pain spots or the issues that there are. You can look at them really objectively.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, when we're engaging with our clients, we're being paid to help out. Make us work. Like, use us as hard as you can. We're there to help you as much as we can, and we're all for kind of rolling our sleeves up and getting into these sorts of situations and seeing what we can do to make it better. So I think always trying to get your partner, and in our case, Condatis, get us working as hard as we can for you, right? That's what we're there to do, and we're happy to do it. So I think it can really be helpful. Okay, so we talked about this. Things to test, and just some of the resources that we talked about. So again, we can make this available to people, but we've got the demo site to talk about how you can access the help desk portal. So that's all, kind of that authentication and making sure you are speaking to who you think you're speaking to, and all that good stuff. We've also got the employee onboarding example. And just to toot your horn, Shelley, we can also link to a previous webinar that you have supported on, and that's kind of the four things you can do today with Entra ID governance to basically get you to where you want to go. I'm conscious of time, and I'm hoping that we maybe have some questions, but again, just a few kind of headlines of, here are some things that you can do. We can set up briefing calls. We've got things kind of, identity governance proof of concepts that we can work with you. Shelley can't say this, but I will, because I'm much more of a rogue. But there is potentially Microsoft funding available for some proof of concepts. And again, we're happy to navigate that through with our client base. And yeah, as I say, Shelley can't say that, but I'll throw it in there. And again, just want to kind of say thank you very much, Shelley. Really appreciate a lot of the feedback. I think you've given some really, really good insights as to what we can actually do. I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck now, and then hopefully kind of open up to questions or anything and see how we go.
Thank you both very much. So everyone, this is an opportunity. If you wish, obviously don't all do it at the same time, but if you have a question you want to come off mute, that's fine. I think you can raise your hand and then we can unmute you. There were some things that were submitted when you actually signed up for the webinar. So I think we have one which was about automated lifecycle management and related processes. Entitlement access management reviews. Can this help streamline processes we need to be developing and challenging? So PIM, MFA, and any extra insights on enforcements and alerting. Shelley, is that something you think you could answer?
What was the actual question?
It's a long one.
So what's the actual question there?
So entitlement management and access reviews for automated lifecycle management, JML.
Yes.
Can this help streamline the processes?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I think, over the last, in July last year, actually, it was when identity governance became available. I think that was a massive step forward, because it's exactly enables that. It's to help streamline those JML processes. And we're seeing a lot of, well, we are still investing. We've seen since July, and we're continuing to see really rapid development. And it's based on customer feedback in terms of what's important for identity governance. So what we have there, we've already seen new workflow triggers being added, thanks to customers actually telling us what's important as part of their own business processes. So we've seen new workflow triggers being added. We've seen additions to the out-of-the-box tasks that those workflows can trigger, and that's a huge thing, because you can always create you can do custom extensions in that we can create a logic app, and that connects to loads of things. But it'd be nice to just not have to have that logic app involved at all, and just do an out-of-the-box task like we have for temporary access passwords. You don't want to have to do any, configuring or programming. You just want to tick a box and say, this is who I want, the password to go to, and this is what I want the email to say, and and you're done. So yeah, so we've seen those out-of-the-box tasks being added. We've seen continual progress on the support for managing on-prem resources with group write-back, and that's group write-back part of Entra Cloud Sync. And also, as I mentioned, you have that capability to reuse your MIM connectors to provision to on-prem applications as well from Entra. And we can also use SCIM and LDAP, and there are a number of options that Entra supports. And the other thing we've added that really can help is the introduction of the API-driven provisioning. So that means that you can automate. I've mentioned HR so many times about there being that authoritative, that source of truth, but actually you can automate onboarding from any repository. So it could be legacy HR system that's on-prem. It could be a database. It could be literally, you could be talking about CSV files. We can use that to automate the provisioning of users into Entra, so regardless of what that source of truth is. But I think that's about it. I think ultimately all the features that we're adding, it's all about enriching the layers of security that we put around identities. But ultimately it starts with the people in that source of truth. So getting that right, and we're continually trying to improve the out-of-the-box capabilities to help that initial onboarding and the uniqueness checks and name changes and all that kind of thing. We're trying to improve that to make that to conform to what you need what you need to see as part of your business processes, and to help handle those business processes. But certainly today, the provisioning service, the Entra provisioning service, which provisions to hybrid and cloud only, you map the data that you want to flow and define. You define the scope and the criteria around who's active, what sort of account do they get, and that can all be done in scope today. And I think that's really the first step in automating the process, but also automating the sort of the entitlement management, that access life cycle, which is as we've mentioned many times, is so important.
Absolutely fantastic, Shelley. Thank you very much. And then one of the questions as well, which actually I think you've covered a lot of at the very beginning about the championing within your organization and how to get people involved. But I think there's a theme within some of the responses that we've had. So integrating JML with non-Microsoft services. So I think there's a curiosity with that, but you've shown that in your journey of how many different providers you can actually integrate with. But how do you start that process, and also how do you get that championship going within your organization to get security included from the very beginning?
So I've been through this with quite a few organizations, and really the most successful projects and the most frictionless, there's always going to be friction, but the most frictionless projects are when we've started with the right people in the room. So we have a workshop where whether it's something you have a workshop you have yourselves, or it's something that you take a partner or Microsoft or however you do it. you need to have the right people in the room. You need people who work for HR. You need somebody responsible for HR, somebody who's responsible on the service desk, the help desk. They know more than anybody else. The issues that users have, and usually about onboarding issues as well. So HR, service desk, so IT. I know IT is like really broad term, but obviously you want security to be involved, but you might have other members of the IT, in terms of the resources and things that you need to support. You need to have them part of the conversation, and resource owners. Now, you might not be able to have every resource owner available, or to be a part of that workshop. That might be, depending on your organization. As I said, you might have many resource owners, but you certainly need representatives from the most important ones, just so that you can have that conversation, that open conversation about what's the goal, and you all need to agree the goal, and also what is the actual process. When you're all together, map that process out really very, in a very detailed way, because I think that is probably the key to success, having all those people on board. I think once you've done that and everybody sees the full picture, it really makes sense. And I really can't say strongly enough how powerful that is in taking the project forward. If you're going back to HR after you've already mapped all this out, you've probably missed things, and they're not going to feel like they've been involved in the process. And I think that's so important, that you take everybody along for the ride and really start together in that initial mapping of the processes.
I mean, it's human nature, right? Nobody wants to feel like they're left out. Nobody wants to have like an IT project or a traditional, where they might think it's an IT project kind of thrust upon them. So exactly. I think it is about figuring out that why. Why are you doing this? Why is it important? Why is it good for the business to go through this? And we really value your input and what your domain expertise, because if you're sitting on the help desk, you're not going to know what it's like to onboard somebody necessarily from an HR standpoint and document. There's going to be lots of things like that. So I think, you're absolutely right. You need to have the right people in the room, but also kind of, really build that business case of, okay, we have to do this, because if we don't, this is what we're doing, and we need your help to achieve it. And, kind of getting that camaraderie for sure.
Exactly. I think once everybody sees the whole picture, the reality of the whole picture, that's when everyone goes, oh, well,
this is important.
This is my area. This is, I think it makes those boundaries or those lines of responsibility, I think it makes it a little clearer, and also just helps with understanding of, if I do my bit, then actually it helps all these other bits go more smoothly. And so I think that really makes such a difference. And rather than just saying something you're being told about 6 months later, going, oh yeah, by the way, you got to do it this way.
For sure.
Okay, I think I'm just looking in the sort of participant area, and I don't see any hands up, and we're very, very close to having to close out. So as we've said, we are going to share the resources. So all those areas that you can demo and test yourself, we'll send you links to that, and we'll send you links to the 4 quick wins stuff that you can get involved in and try out Entra ID Governance for yourselves. And as always, we're here to help you on your journey. If you need to speak to us at any point, you're going to get Gillian and Shelley's details after this as well. So I hope you have enjoyed the session and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll send you the recording soon. Thank you very much. I hope you have a nice afternoon if you're on our time zone.
Thanks very much. See you soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.